Good morning. Welcome to our fourth accountability and performance meeting. For the benefit of members of the public who are watching, I'll just go through some housekeeping points before we get onto the agenda. I'm Jonathan Shepherd, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Charlie Hall, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire. This meeting helps me discharge one of my statutory duties, which is to hold the Chief Constable to account for the delivery of policing in the county, and we do it in a transparent way so the public can see some of the issues that we are discussing and addressing. The meeting is designed to be strategic in nature, and so it doesn't discuss any individual cases where there are established procedures for issues to be raised, including through the complaints team in my office. This meeting is being recorded, so the recording will be published on the PCC's website thereafter, so it's available for members of the public who aren't able to attend in person, should they wish to look back at it. I will just say before we get on to today's agenda that both the Chief Constable and I are obviously very aware of the inspection report that was published by the Inspectorate yesterday. Obviously, because it was published yesterday, we won't be discussing that today, and so that will be discussed at our next APM on the 14th of November. We've got 4 items on today's agenda, though, which we'll go through in this order. So firstly, an update on the progress with Operation Hotspot. Secondly, the police response to stalking. That follows a national report into a super complaint made by the Susie Lampew Trust. A report by the Inspectorate on the national operating model for rape and serious sexual offences, and then a report by the Inspectorate around activism and impartiality in policing. We'll take the agenda items in that order. So firstly, I'm keen to just get a broadly half-year update on where the Constabulary is with Operation Hotspot. So that's the programme that's been introduced with some Home Office funding to target antisocial behaviour, crime and violence in 26 hotspots around the county. So perhaps if I could just start, Chief Constable, by just asking for an update on how that's gone since it was launched in May.
Yeah, certainly, Commissioner. We have discussed this previously as well through this meeting, but as you say, we're now 6 months into that. We were granted £1 million from the Home Office to support this work, and we've absolutely embraced that and delivered across all 10 of our district areas into those hotspots. And in effect, that is a short period of highly visible patrol activity that's taken place to deter antisocial behaviour, criminality in those locations. So where we are at currently, over the 6 months, we've now dedicated over 7,500 hours of patrol into those locations across the county, and that's fairly evenly spread across the different months and the locations. And in particular, Watford and Stevenage as an area of Manor both had over 1,000 hours of additional patrol time targeted at the locations in those areas as well. In terms of outcomes that we've achieved as a result of those patrols to date, and these numbers are continuing growing sort of day by day, but we've now had 83 people arrested directly as a result of that patrol activity, stop and searched nearly 150 people in those locations through those patrols, and we've recovered a number of items as a result of those stop and searches, which includes a substantial number of knives, knuckle dusters and batons have been taken off the streets as well. We are going to need to undertake a sort of fuller evaluation as to the exact impact that's then having on levels of antisocial behaviour and crime in those locations. But we are most certainly being active, and I'm really confident it's having a positive impact in those areas, and the officers themselves are enjoying doing that. Looking forward, we're going to continue it for the remaining part of the year, and I have met with the teams that are running this and asked them to step up to ensure that we fully, or as far as we can, we spend as much of the money that's been allocated. The criteria for what we spend this on is quite tight, as you'll be aware, but we are looking to see how it can support us through some of the known events that we've got coming up, so the likes of Halloween, which can be associated with social behaviour and across the Christmas period as well, to ensure that we can use the funding to support still more visible activity. We're also looking to see whether we can use it with some of our analytical and IT support to help target these patrols exactly where they are needed. So at the moment, got a little bit more work to do to make sure we spend all the money, but we are making progress.
That's really useful. Thank you for that update. And yeah, I think it's really important to say those are additional hours of patrols on top of the work that officers would have been doing in those communities anyway. And I've certainly seen some really positive results and reception for those patrols when I've been out with officers on a few of those. Thinking forward to the end of the financial year when that bit of Home Office funding goes, what are the Constabulary's initial thoughts on the sort of lessons for continuing some of that hotspot approach when perhaps we don't have some of the funding to specifically direct additional patrols?
Sure. So as you say, the patrols at the moment are being funded almost exclusively on overtime using the Home Office money, and we have to find the officers who are prepared to do that. And as you can see from the numbers, we have managed that. That's one reason why I'm keen to invest further in the technology, because I think we can draw in the technology that will help capture the time that officers are, when they're not on overtime and they're on normal routine patrols, are spending in those areas. And in particular, this technology will be able to help direct those officers into these locations and identify to them when they happen to be in those areas and encourage them to take certain actions, i.e. to stop vehicles, get out and be on foot patrol within that. So yeah, that will be a way that we would look to continue. We need to do the evaluation and be able to demonstrate the positive impact that these patrols have. That will be important for the workforce and staff to be able to play that back to them to say, actually, if you do this, if you do follow what the apps on your phones are asking you to do, you are going to have a really positive impact in reducing the wider demand in that case. I should have said we've also been working with street wardens and partner organisations who have a uniform presence in some of these locations as well, and trying to encourage them to spend some additional dwell time in these locations, and we've been able to achieve that as well. And those organisations have contributed getting onto about 300 hours of time in addition to what I've already captured and described to you. And we will look to extend that engagement as well, because it's not necessarily just police officers' presence, but it's a wider uniform patrol presence that we know all the research says is beneficial.
That's really useful, thank you. And I think that visibility comes out top, on all of the surveys of what residents in Hertfordshire want to see. We know that, and so it's really good to see that being able to be delivered and the impacts that are coming from that. So thank you for that update. I'll go on then to the second item, which probably going to take a little bit longer, which is the police response to stalking. So as I said at the beginning, there was a secret complaint made nationally, doesn't specifically relate to Hertfordshire, a couple of years ago by the Susie Lamplugh Trust. And there was a recent report from the College of Policing, IOPC and Inspectorate around that, and I think broadly can be summarised as quite a lot of work to do across policing around the response to stalking. Can I start by asking how the Constabulary is reflecting on the findings and recommendations of that report? And in doing so, I recognise a lot of those recommendations are not just for Chief Constables and police, but for a wide range of other organisations, including government and other agencies. And also recognise that a lot of those are sort of by dates in next year, so I'm not expecting a final answer to them, but be useful to just understand sort of initial reflections.
Sure. As you say, it's an important report. I think it's a really useful and helpful report. It is a sizable report, and I've got a printed out copy here, so it runs to many, many pages and touches on a number of areas as you've described. I think it illustrates across policing as a whole there is more work do to better protect people and better understand how we deal with stalking through that. The Constabulary has already made progress over the last few years against many of the areas that are touched upon in this. There's undoubtedly more that we do need to do to pick up on all the areas that the report touches on and ensure that people can feel confident that when they come to police and describe circumstances that amount to stalking, they will get a good response from us. So I've set a piece of work in train headed up by the Detective Chief Superintendent, who oversees our safeguarding command, where this work would naturally be led. They have got the task of working through the report, understanding what our current practices, how they match up against what's described within the report, to look at the recommendations. And he has already set in place some meeting structures, engaging appropriate people across the organisation to make an assessment of our processes, our training, the technology that we've got to capture this, the intelligence assessments that we have. He's advising in some areas we appear to be in a reasonably good place with this, but there's definitely other areas that progress will need to be made. And one of those important ones, and it does pick up a bit of a theme that came out in the PL assessment that was published yesterday, is we've got to get stronger at recognising these reports and properly recording them into our crime recording system. And indeed, one of the weaknesses the report picked out yesterday would be in our ability to do this. So we've known about this for a number of months now, so that work's already well in train and probably started about a year ago, and we're already seeing our reports of stalking that we are recording increasing, and on the back of that, whilst we are coming from a lower level than we should be coming from, they are definitely increasing. But against that, the outcome rates, when we measure that, shows a more positive picture. In part, that will be because we've not been recording as many as we should have done, but also I think some reassurance when we do identify and record these, we are managing to move a significant number of them through to the prosecution stage within that. We are required by the report to submit an action plan, a detailed action plan of the work that we are doing against the themes within the report and the recommendations. So that's all being put together as well. We will scrutinise that through the Chief Officer team, and that will be submitted in accordance with the deadline that they've asked for, which is early next month, I believe, as I recall. And in addition to that, what we're doing here in Force, there's a great deal of work that's taking place nationally, and we will remain really heavily connected in with that and pick up the revised guidance that we anticipate will come from the College of Policing as to how policing should be dealing with these reports.
Thank you for that. And I've certainly seen in some of the conversations we've had around performance, some of those reporting beginning to come through in terms of better awareness of cases in Hertfordshire. So that's positive to see those changes being made. To just pick up then on that recording point, there's a recommendation in the report around the kind of visibility and identification of stalking offences where they're perhaps not recorded as principal crime. How will that be factored into the work that the Constabulary is doing on crime recording and ensuring that officers do have that visibility of stalking where perhaps it's being reported as a secondary offence?
Yeah, so we're in terms of the recording, as I say, there is a great deal of work, and we are recording more offences, not only in stalking but across a number of other areas, and we need to do that. It's important to do that so that we can properly analyse and understand patterns of behaviour, patterns of offending, as well as fully investigate each of those individual reports effectively. So to describe precisely what the picture looks like at the moment, we haven't got all the data that we need to analyse, but that work is firmly within our analytical teams and our intelligence teams to build and grow that picture. And we have indeed asked that it features more heavily in our strategic assessments across the county going forward, so we do properly get that picture coming forward to us. And in particular, one of the things we need to understand is we need to differentiate between the online stalking offences that are taking place and the in-person stalking offences as such. Sometimes they will, victims will experience both, of course. Sometimes it may only be one of those areas. We partly need to understand that because how we respond to it, how we deal with it, put interventions in place, will differ slightly depending on how the stalking itself is being conducted and perpetrated. So we need to get a clear differentiation between that, and some of that is then how we can use, certainly for the online space, some technology and tools and support victims to be able to block out the stalking attempts that are being made in that online space as well. So I think it's fair to say that that is an area that remains that we've got to do more work on, but I'm confident that work is underway. And until we know that, and we'll talk, I think, some more about some of the preventative work that's taken place, until we get a really clear picture of that, our preventative actions can't be as refined and focused as they need to be.
Thank you. And thinking then about that work to improve the understanding and the knowledge, do you have a sort of timescale in mind for when the Constabulary will be in the place you'd like it to be, recognising it's a slightly evolving picture on that? Have you set a kind of target for the teams around that?
Yeah, I think I'm looking for the group that the Chief Superintendent has pulled together has got this work, so that will be apparent in the return that we provide. In my mind, I think certainly by the end of the calendar year, we will be in a much stronger position to be able to be more confident that we are capturing all the reports that are coming through. I've seen the chart and the graph as to how our reports of stalking are accelerating, and it is very clear there's already a sea change in how we are recording these offences. And through that, and we're also seeing that in some of the preventative actions that are now being put in place, there has definitely been a significant change in the last 12 months as to how we're picking up with that. I need to see from the Chief Superintendent exactly what his view is now of that, those actions, and when we get to a point where we can be really confident that it's coming through. In part, some of this is because I need to be confident frontline workforce is properly trained and understand what they are looking for, and that are picking these reports up at the earliest stage.
And that brings me on nicely to what my next question was going to be, because there is a recommendation in the report around updating the sort of learning and training provision relating to stalking. So can you talk me through what the Constabulary envisages will be needed for frontline officers, call handlers, that people in those sorts of roles?
Yeah, so we've got a training package already that we've been delivering since the end of April into frontline colleagues, and in particular those who are most likely to be dealing with these reports. So that includes into our frontline local officers, into our neighbourhood policing teams, and also some further specialist training that we will be putting into our control room operatives and some of our safeguarding teams, our domestic abuse teams, our sexual offence teams, who in particular may come across some of these reports. So we've trained 550 officers already through that. That training is going to continue as we work throughout the whole workforce. We do need to just take a slight pause to review what's in this report to make sure that training is indeed covering the areas that we need it to cover. But as I say, given the way the reports are coming up, there's already some confidence I think I can have that the inputs we've been given are making a change in the way we are recognising and recording these. And then, of course, what's really important is the investigation of the ops.
Thank you. That's useful. So turning then to what happens when when it's being recorded. One of the things that comes out in a lot of reports around looking at stalking is around that sort of really kind of pernicious, kind of growing offending kind of pattern of behaviour, and sometimes kind of escalation of risk. Within those investigations and those work with victims, once that report has been made and recorded, how does the Constabulary seek to understand and respond to that picture of escalating risk in a particular case?
Yeah, so we are increasingly using some of the protective orders that are available to us, and we've invested in a team to support and help the whole workforce with understanding the range of orders that are available, how to apply for them, because they are processes that require applications through the courts system, and they need the evidence all putting together. And in particular, in doing that, we are working with victims and people reporting these offences to ensure that we take on the responsibility for applying those orders and do not put that burden onto the individual, which is a position that we maybe a few years ago would have adopted. And it's really important that we support the victims through this and take that responsibility on for them. So across a range of orders in the last 18 months, we've got over 1,000 orders of different types that we've applied for. Many of them community protection warnings, domestic violence protection notices and orders. In the stalking space, that are specific stalking protection orders that we are now working more and more with. They can be particularly restrictive on the individuals that are subject to those orders in terms of restricting places they can go, the contact that they can make with individuals who use social media, and can include putting tags on them so that we can recognise what their movements are. And so far we've had 20 orders in place over the last 12 months. This year we've got another 9 orders that we are progressing. Some of those still working through the courts, but there's some really helpful restrictions that places on offenders to manage those. And then the wider piece around offenders is connected with that analytical work. We need to make sure that we properly understand who these individuals are, and that we can make our frontline colleagues aware of that as well, so that they know what to do if they come across these individuals, to reassure our victims.
Thank you. And in relation then to just press a little bit on the stalking protection order, so 20 over the last year, more in the system.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of broadly recognised that a lot of those orders give policing some quite good powers, as you've described, to mitigate risk and put some protections in place for victims. To what extent are you confident that a stalking protection order is being considered in every case? Obviously, it won't necessarily be appropriate in every case.
Yeah,
but is that being considered, consistently across those investigations?
This is some of the work that is within the action plan that I've described, because I need to be confident that it is. We've not used them as much as we could have used. They're a relatively new order, but they've not been used as much as we need to be using them. The rate at which we are using them is increasing, and I absolutely need to be confident in every appropriate case they are properly being considered. So this is one of the primary drivers for investing further resource in a small specialist team who really understands the range of orders available, because in not every case will a stalking protection order be the appropriate route to go, but there are well over 25 different protective orders that can be applied in different situations. And it may be that we choose to use a different order as an appropriate way of dealing with what's in place, be that domestic violence protection order, community protection orders, or some of the other ones that are available to us to use. And the team that we've bolstered now have particularly got that range and expertise. I need to ensure they are getting themselves involved in all appropriate cases and helping and supporting the specialist teams to understand how to apply for these orders, and then to take on the responsibility of doing that work for them, which in some cases is involves quite a legal process to work through, and some specialist legal input as well to get them over the line and through the court system.
Okay, thank you. It'd be useful to see the outcome of that, because I think that is certainly an area where a lot can be done to protect victims. And I think from what you're saying, your expectation would be that the use of those orders is going to continually grow, both in terms of understanding the number of cases, putting more resources and more focus on the use of the powers. That's going to result in more of those powers being used.
Yeah, so I know we'll discuss the appeal report another time, but one of the lines in there is that our use needs to improve of the orders. That was reporting the position that they found 12 months ago. This work has been accelerating really significantly in the last 12 months, and our confidence we sit here today are the position on orders that is within that report is already very different to the one that that data shows, and I'm expecting that to continue, in part because of the investment in resource that we've put in, the investment in some of the technology to track it and ensure that our teams are fully aware of the wide range of orders that we can place, because they are protective, they are providing some confidence to victims that action is being taken. There are constraints being placed on offenders, and if they breach those orders, there are serious consequences for them, because they will be before the court having breached an order, and criminal sanctions may follow.
And then the final area I wanted to ask is there's a number of recommendations in the report around improving the victim experience and making sure that the investigations are victim-centred and provide kind of or contribute to a sort of wider multi-agency response to that. So my first question is, how's the Constabulary monitoring the experience of victims in relation to stalking cases?
Yes, a number of things I think here. One is we expect our frontline supervisors to be supervising these cases, and a key part of that is ensuring that victims are being updated and the victim's experience is good, and that we are appropriately listening to the victim and understanding how vulnerable they may feel through this. In addition to that, we now have some victim surveys to survey victims of stalking, harassment offences, so that we can properly understand what their experience has been of us as to how we've worked that through. We will take the findings of that and what we hear from that and use that to feed back into the work that is being led in response to this, and ensure that we can make improvements where they are necessary. And a huge part of the training that we've delivered has a very strong victim-centred focus to that, to ensure that officers understand this is the case. And indeed, earlier in the year, I ran some road shows, for want of a better word, where I saw the vast majority of the workforce through one of the theatres at Letchworth. I think we got over 3,500 members of staff through there. And one of the situations that we talked to them about through that was the impact of domestic abuse, stalking on victims. It was illustrated with some specific case studies, and indeed in some victim survivors coming and speaking to us, which proved to be very powerful to help the workforce understand what victims may experience, both in terms of the offending itself towards them and the stalking behaviours, but also the way we respond to it and how that can make them feel both positively and negatively, to ensure that we are putting the victim's needs front and centre.
Thank you. It was certainly very, very powerful having gone along to one of those sessions. My final question around this is around the sort of broader partnership and multi-agency response, particularly around supporting victims. Again, one of the recommendations in there that sort of goes beyond just being around policing. What are your reflections around the partnership approach and what work might be needed in Hertfordshire around stalking work, bringing multiple agencies together?
I think we've got some strong partnership arrangements generally in Hertfordshire, particularly around vulnerability safeguarding, be that safeguarding children's boards, safeguarding adults boards within this. An action in here is to ensure that stalking, domestic abuse already has a very strong partnership focus in that. We need to ensure that that is considering stalking, harassment as part of that. Of course, not always. In fact, more often than not, it won't be directly related to domestic abuse cases. So we need to ensure that that it's not being seen as this only happens in domestic arrangements. It absolutely doesn't. In fact, it's probably more widespread outside of those arrangements. So the work that the Chief Super is leading will be picking up on the partnership angles that are mentioned within here and extending the discussions that we have on a regular basis with our partners around safeguarding issues to ensure that the stalking points are properly addressed as well. And the other organisation that is really helpful with this is the Susie Lambton Trust yourself, which raised the complaint, and they have a wealth of experience and resources that we will be looking to draw upon to support the work we do as well.
No, it's a really useful area of work. So thank you for that. I think that there's clearly a lot of work being done in that area, which is reassuring, and be good to see the outcome of that as it sort of progresses into its next stages. I'm going to move on to our third agenda item, which is Operation Soteria and the National Operating Model for Rape and Serious Sexual Offences. So this is a report done by the Inspectorate nationally, again, not specifically relating to Hertfordshire, looking at the work that's being done by a number of pilot forces that Hertfordshire wasn't one of, to implement a new way of dealing with rape and serious sexual offences investigations. And I think what that's broadly shown is some quite considerable improvement possible through that national operating model that forces nationally are now looking to roll out, and the report provides some evaluation and reflection and recommendations on that. So perhaps if I could start by asking how the Constabulary is reflecting on the findings and recommendations on the report, and how the work to introduce that national operating model will help in Hertfordshire.
Okay, so we have adopted the Op Soteria model of investigating offences around rape, serious sexual offence cases. It was developed initially in Avon and Somerset, and we've formally adopted this last year and have been working through the detail of the model, and the points and the sort of key points of that national model are to get better outcomes for all victims of these offences, to get some procedural justice as well in the way that the cases are investigated and worked through, and obviously to reduce and prevent rape and serious sexual offences going forwards. And the work's broken down into 6 pillars. We were, as a force, and we have for the last 5-6 years, focused a lot of effort into this area, particularly around the pillars that would be around addressing the criminal justice process, bringing cases to court, listening effectively to victims. We'd already done a lot of work with the Crown Prosecution Service locally around this training into our specialist teams, and we do have dedicated specialist teams that work in that area. However, the Op Soteria model is slightly broader than that as well. So we've now had a team working through all those other pillars as well to ensure that work such as getting more data and performance information, some of the continuous learning processes that are inherent within the Op Soteria model are being trained into our investigators and the officers who work through these cases going forward. So we've got a clear programme of work that is doing that, tracking what's expected across these, delivering more training and experts into the team. There's monthly checkpoint meetings that are run by one of the assistant chief constables to monitor that progress. And there's been a self-assessment tool as well that the national team has made available that we have worked through to help benchmark ourselves against 6 pillars of the programme and where we are. So I think it's definitely not a blank sheet of paper that we started from on this. It's apparent when we've worked through the self-assessment, particularly in achieving some better outcomes. We've already done a significant amount of work, but we're now working that through in a more detailed way in some of those other areas as well.
Thank you for that. And so I think we discussed previously the outcome rate in terms of bringing offenders to justice for rape is, it sits at a pretty good level in Hertfordshire compared to some of the national figures. So as you say, you're starting from a good place. There's quite a number of recommendations in this report for forces. There's a few I particularly wanted to pick up on. But I suppose before doing so, just kind of reflecting on the progress that Constabulary's made so far, are there areas of that national operating model that have been harder to implement than others? And are there areas where there are some resource implications or training implications still in terms of areas to get to where they need to be?
Yeah, so it's a really broad set of recommendations within that. As ever, one of the challenging ones is how we get the whole workforce trained and understanding the specifics around this. So that's probably the area that particularly takes the time. So we've already delivered a lot of training into our specialist investigators who are in our specialist team. That will be continuing as well. They get a dedicated 2-week course, and that training continues to evolve and change as some of the evidence-based practice works through. But that will be around specifics of how to investigate, how to manage offenders within that. There's some wider work that we are putting in place really for a whole of the front line and what their initial response needs to look like, what the approach needs to be to victims, how they ensure they capture best evidence at an early stage through that, so that their initial work can feed in for the specialist investigators that then pick that up from there, and they've captured everything they should have done, preserved the forensic evidence and capture, and importantly are approaching and speaking to victims in the right way, many of whom will have found it a difficult, bold step to even come and report it to us in the first place. And I certainly want to ensure those individuals feel really properly supported and is described to them as to what we will do and how we will take that forward. So that training has commenced, but there will be more work to do to work that through. And then I think the other pillar that we have been doing more on is how we particularly focus on the offenders and how we can disrupt the offenders. It's not always possible for various reasons. Sometimes because the victim survivors themselves are not particularly keen to support us taking these cases through to court and criminal justice outcomes. Sometimes there may be evidential reasons why it's not get there. However, we need to make sure we are heavily focused on the intelligence that we are picking up about offenders, and especially where we identify individuals who appear to be repeat offenders, that we are looking to other ways to disrupt them, their activities and protect victims through this. And that's an area of growing focus for us.
That's good to hear, and it's one of the areas that the report picks up in terms of different approaches across policing nationally around those kind of repeat offenders and suspects. So I'm pleased to hear that that's an area of focus, and particularly in relation to words on words cases. There are some recommendations around that. How's the Constabulary approaching, and again, it may well be around training, the investigation of those kinds of cases that can be more complicated?
Yeah, well, we've definitely trained that into our investigators, and so I'm actually quite proud of some of the work that we've previously done on this with the Crown Prosecution Service. Locally, we've got a very good relationship with the specialist Crown prosecutors, work with the CPS. We consult them on cases really early on to get their advice as to how we can look to take these cases forwards. I think our outcome rates are showing that seems to have some really good progress, because it does compare very favourably and has for a number of years with the national picture. It's about half as good again as to what the average task forces nationally is, and I want to see that continue to move forwards. And then the other thing we often discuss is the evidence in itself such that we can take an evidence-led prosecution, even if the victim, for whatever reason, is unwilling to support that themselves. Sometimes that will be through fear or intimidation. And we will discuss very closely with the CPS, including word on word, what other information, patterns of behaviour can we put into a prosecution file that would enable us to take that forward. So you're absolutely right. Often it's word on word. It comes down to consent issues, but the investigators will not just rest on that, and they will look to overturn every stone they possibly can to get cases at the point where they can be taken forward to prosecution.
Thank you, and yeah, that's incredibly important for victim survivors, and as you say, is reflected in the outcome rates in Hertfordshire, and offenders in Hertfordshire are far more likely to be prosecuted and convicted than nationally. I think it's really important that is understood as the starting point for all this work, and reflects where the Constabulary has been focusing on, which is important. Again, I wanted to touch around, as the previous topic, the approach to that sort of victim survivor centred approach to this. You touched a little bit there around that, but can you just talk me through some of the work the Constabulary is doing to ensure that the victim is being put at the heart of investigations, particularly in terms of the support they're provided through what can be a re-traumatizing experience sometimes in the criminal justice system?
Yeah, so we've trained our investigators. So a lot of the training focuses on having a truly victim-centred approach, being able to hear what the victim has to say, to keep them regularly informed so that they feel closely engaged and understanding what we are doing with their case, and to understand their wishes through that as well. As I've already said, not always do victims wish for that to progress through the full rigours of the criminal justice system, and sometimes their wish is that they just wish to be heard and explain their story. And clearly, what that does do is give us helpful information and intelligence, and particularly understanding the picture around offenders and repeat offenders. We will put all of that information in, and sometimes that will highlight individuals that are moving between different victims. And then we will trigger the wider work we do around offenders to try and disrupt their behaviour, even if it's not able to prosecute for those individual offences. We also work very closely with our ISVA service, our sexual assault and volunteer service, who provide support into victims of sexual abuse, and that's an outstanding service they provide. They're able to spend time with victims to explain the processes, offer the support, psychological, medical, whatever support is required. And I take my hat off to the people who provide that service, because they absolutely care for the victims of sexual assault, violence, to work through with that. And then we are also engaged in some victim survey work as well, which the City of London Police help with. So it's done independently from Hertfordshire, and we've had sufficient through that now to get bespoke feedback reports from the City of London Police as to what victims are saying about the way they are dealt with through the processes that we run in the Constabulary. And we use those reports to look at if there are further changes that need to be made, if there's some common themes that are being said that we need to ensure that we are improving upon. Again, that feeds back into some of the training, the guidance that we give to both our specialist investigators and also our frontline officers as to how to engage victims effectively through that.
Thank you for that, and I'd certainly concur with your comments around the ISVAs and a number of other organisations around the county doing some really good work to support victims. As far as I met the Hertfordshire Rape Crisis Centre a few weeks back, and some really great to support victims as well in the voluntary sector. So that's really positive. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on then to our final agenda item, which is an inspectorate report on activism and impartiality in policing. So this was commissioned by, I was going to say the Home Secretary, but I think it's probably about 3 Home Secretaries ago, to look at a number of concerns that she had at that time around sort of politically contested matters, and probably the report has come up with some slightly different recommendations to what she might have envisaged at the time, but there's a few things that's useful to just look at in quite a complicated space, I think I'd say, around issues that can sometimes be a bit emotive and driven a bit by social media, but which police officers need to sort of navigate their way through. To start off with, perhaps if I could just ask for your reflections on the findings and recommendations on the report, and again recognising that there are some recommendations for forces and other recommendations for other bodies.
Certainly, I've got a copy of the report here. It is relatively substantial. I think it landed with us about 2 months ago, and I think it has been a complicated inspection, a complicated area to look at within here. We are working it through and digesting. There's a number of recommendations in here, some of which are pitched at Chief Constables and forces, others at College of Policing and the wider system within there. I think sort of underpinning all of it is the continuing need to ensure that policing is impartial in the way we discharge our functions, and that we can have confidence that the workforce is impartial within that, but also recognises to do that we need to be able to engage effectively with the whole of society and all different communities and community groups, and recognise the diversity within both the workforce and the community as a whole. And the report, I think, tries to help us through that, make some recommendations to check and look at some processes that forces are running to ensure that is the case. But I think in the broadest case, I think the report, certainly in terms of how I think we've approached things in Hertfordshire over a good many years now, provides some reasonable validation for the approach that we take to engage communities and ensure that all communities feel that we are there as a police service for them, and that they can have some trust and confidence in approaching us. That's not to say there aren't things that we may need to do slightly differently and reflect on further, and ensure some of the auditing and checking processes can give proper confidence around that. And to that extent, I've got a superintendent in our policy team that's currently working through this in detail and using that to check against what our policies currently say, and to identify those that we may need to review and make some adjustments to based on the recommendations that come through here. And that would include things such as the process we undertake to deal with reports of hate crime or hate incidents, which receive some mention in the report as well.
Thank you, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the inspectorate made really clear that it's the kind of legislation and regulations around some of these areas are quite complex and have provided some challenges. And I think sometimes it's useful in these conversations to just recognise that that is the case. I think the other thing that I would say, certainly from what I've seen in the few months I've been in role, these issues are well dealt with in Hertfordshire, and certainly the feedback I get from the public is very much in line with that. So I'm certainly not approaching this conversation by thinking there's an area for concern, because that's very much not what I've heard from the public. A few points I wanted to pick up from the recommendations. First, there was quite an interesting section in the report around media coverage, reporting of policing, and particularly commentary from officers feeling that the public commentary of policing can be very negative, and perhaps the absence of positive commentary around the work that they do, and it's true that the good news doesn't sell. What's the Constabulary doing to try and address that in terms of making sure that there is as much balance as possible in the narrative around policing, and the work that officers are doing is being reflected in a way that supports public confidence?
Certainly, it's a complex area, and we do know, and the workforce feels at times that some of the public reporting of it is not always balanced. It's certainly that bad news spreads more rapidly than good news, certainly in the media within that. And we've had examples of that, I think, in Hertfordshire that officers would point to, and they do feel it. They read it themselves, they hear it themselves, and sometimes that gets played back to them by members of the public that they come across as well. That said, the media have a really important role in society, and it is important that they report on some of these things through that. And I absolutely recognise that. And it wouldn't be, we can't control that. It wouldn't be right for us to control it either, because it's important that as a public sector organisation we are held to account for the spend of public money. However, we do look to promote a lot of the good work that is done in the Constabulary, and my feeling is that far outweighs the negative on a day-to-day basis. Much of it flies beneath the radar, doesn't get reported, but we will use our own social media channels to promote that, be it through our Facebook accounts, our Instagram. Increasingly on TikTok, you will see some things that we put out to engage with different sections of the community, particularly younger people. That's a good engagement tool. We've got our Hearts Connected service that we regularly engage with communities on a hyper-local level to describe incidents that have been happening, appeals, put out prevention advice, and put out good work through that. And there is no doubt that the feeling, the morale of the whole organisation is influenced by the stories that are out there about us. And part of my role is to try and ensure that the people working for the organisation recognise the value that they add into the community, and when they are feeling positive about that, I genuinely think they work more effectively. And sadly, it's often not the local media, but some of the national media stories, sometimes the whole workforce, I think, would feel can work against that, which is why we try and balance that with a lot of the good that's going on in the organisation.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly I see that when I talk with officers, and inevitably in placing a huge amount of work gets done to protect the public and pursue criminals that the public will never see. And it's important that we do get that message out as much as possible in terms of that work that the public can be shown, to provide that reassurance around what is being done, because there's a huge amount, from what I see, that the public should be very reassured about that is happening. On some of the issues around impartiality, there's quite a number of sections of the report and recommendations around things like the governance arrangements on things like staff networks, policies around what officers can wear, compliance with equality duties, those sorts of areas. Perhaps as a broader question over all of those, what steps do you take as Chief Constable to assure yourself of the impartiality of officers under your direction?
Yeah, so I think the vast majority of staff and officers and staff in the workforce take impartiality responsibility really seriously. We have a very clear police code of ethics, which is available on the internet if people wanted to research that. It sets out clear standards that police officers and staff are expected to abide by in the way that they carry out their work and their duties. And certainly for police officers, that stipulates very clearly that that's off-duty behaviour as well as on-duty behaviour. And by and large, the personal values that people work by reflect those code of ethics, which includes being impartial through that. So there are many staff that pride themselves on following those values carefully and being impartial. But clearly, I need to be assured that is taking place as well. So there are many mechanisms in place to do that. One, we regularly talk about it. We encourage people to challenge and question where they feel those ethical values aren't being met, or members of staff are not being ethical or impartial around that. We have reporting mechanisms available through supervisors, leaders, who are expected to then intervene and deal with those issues. Our professional standards department will investigate the more serious breaches of that. That includes confidential reporting routes to be able to report that as well. And you will back to the media angle as well. When we deal with those misconduct cases, some of them have involved people who have not been impartial or have not respected vulnerability or diversity, and very often those officers, members of staff, find themselves being dismissed or being forced to resign effectively from the organisation. And I think one positive thing is we are so transparent with that all of those cases get publicised and they all end up in the media. And the media often run with these cases, and it's an example of that double-edged sword, that us demonstrating how prepared we are to deal with these issues and be transparent can also sometimes, in the way that reporting appear like it's a negative story. But clearly the behaviour in many of those cases is absolutely not fitted with the values that we expect, and that's the reason why they are required to leave the organisation. And it will sometimes get quite significant media attention. But on the other side, it is the organisation being absolutely prepared to deal with that behaviour and do it in a transparent way. And then we have there's other mechanisms that we have. So officers carry their body-worn video footage that captures interactions they have with members of the public. Supervisors review that. We have, as we've spoken about previously, an independent panel that dip samples those and looks at those interactions, including as well the way we use force on members of the public, and the stop and search processes and the way they operate, and provides reports back for us. And we've got a structure within the Constabulary that looks at all of that, looks to pick up themes as well, and we'll feed that back into training, guidance, as well for managers and supervisors. And then to assist further, we maintain a number of staff support networks that work and are available for officers and staff anywhere across the constabulary to be part of, so that maybe represents particular diverse groups, people who associate with different characteristics, be that the LGBT plus group or our Muslim Police Association, our Herts Black and Asian Police Association. We've got a group for disabled members of staff. We've got some faith-based groups as well, and they are important for us as well, so that we can understand particular needs that people who associate with those characteristics may have, and that we can adapt and adjust our policies appropriately. And they also help hugely with our approach to local communities as well, and how best to engage and understand specific needs that different community groups have in those needs.
Thank you. And there's a number of recommendations around reviewing some of those policies and process, and presumably that's the work you've tasked the superintendent in the policy team to do. Useful, thank you. I wanted to just ask around the constabulary's approach to non-crime hate incidents, or again, there's some recommendations in the report around recording processes, some of the guidance. It is a pretty complex area in terms of that difference between what's recorded as a crime and what's recorded as an incident. I mean, perhaps for the benefit of members of the public watching, could you just talk me through that difference and how those kinds of issues are handled by the constabulary, what kinds of response they would be expected to get?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of debate about this over recent years, and there's a relatively recent College of Policing guidelines to help forces understand what is a crime, what is an incident, and when they should be recorded and further police action should or should not be taken. Broadly, the crimes are defined within the crime recording standards, and a hate crime can cover a number of different areas, but it's in particular where there is clearly a crime that has taken place in accordance with legislation, be that an assault or theft and harassment, and that there is clear evidence that it indicates that seems to be driven, motivated by hate towards protected characteristics, be that on account of nationality, ethnicity, sexuality and the like. We will record those formally as crimes in accordance with that College of Policing guidance. There's other things that may be reported, and often this might be comments or what some might describe as their rights under free speech to express views and opinions about different groups that don't classify as crimes themselves. And on that basis, the guidance is particularly clear that hate incidents, we would largely not look to put probably any further investigation into most of those cases, but in a small number of occasions where that incident is specifically targeted and likely to represent a real risk of significant harm to an individual or groups with protected characteristics, we may look to investigate that further. And our recording of those in particular is focused around, for hate incidents, whether we record the personal data or not as to the person who is allegedly, from the report, responsible for that. In most cases where we do not assess that really significant harm to individuals or groups that would require significant further investigation, we would not record that detail within there. It is quite complex, the guidance, and some officers do have some challenge. We're working through that. So, but what we do have is we've got a network across the county of hate crime officers who specialise in this area, are very familiar with guidance, and the whole force refers these cases into those individuals who play a leading role in help us to determine whether these reports should be recorded, if they should be recorded, whether they're incidents or they're crimes, and to guide whether any further investigation is appropriate or not. And there are some recommendations regarding that guidance, further work that comes in as a result of this inspection that we will be paying close heed to as well, and looking to see whether that those procedures get adjusted more formally. On the back of that, we've had some training packages that we've put into the workforce as well, including our control room staff, to help ensure that hate crimes and incidents can be properly differentiated, and that for a number of these there is no role really for the police to play, unpleasant as they may appear to some of the people who are reporting these, and many of these might have been things that have been said on social media, for example, but that does not mean there's a role for police to follow up on some of these unless there is a really significant threat of harm that is apparent.
Thank you. That's really useful, and I think that clarity is helpful, particularly around that point around significant harm, because as you say, sometimes the public perception of what is a policing matter and what isn't can get quite mixed up. And I think this is Hate Crime Awareness Week this week, and there's some really good work being done earlier in the week with young people in the county around addressing hate crime. And I think it's really important that a robust approach is taken to hate crimes, and which can be really really horrendous impact for people, target people based on who they are, but actually, as you say, where it's people saying things that maybe aren't at the criminal standard, that does need a bit of care. Recognising that is incredibly complex. Obviously, you've got those hate crime officers in place to bring that sort of specialist knowledge. Is there any further auditing process that goes into checking that judgment is being made correctly between crime and incident?
Yeah, there is. We have, so in terms of, and this is work the Constabulary needs to, in a broader sense, make sure we've got in the right place, but we do have, we have a crime registrar is the title in the force, whose role is to be the guardian of the crime recording standards, to ensure that where things fit against that, they are being recorded as crimes. Where they don't, they're not recorded as crimes. There's a team of people that sits around that as well, doing this work and checking that the recording practices are correct. And then behind that, we do some auditing as well to check that they are making the right decisions through this case. And that team of people looks at, as well as the broader crime and incident basket, have a particular focus within there. One of the streams they look at is the way we are dealing with reports of hate crime and hate incidents, and to ensure that the recording is correct in that way. As I say, we know from our recent report we've got to get some of those processes working still more effectively, but that's that's where the responsibility sits.
Great, thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda, so I'm going to close the meeting there. Chief Constable, thank you for that. The next meeting of these is 14th of November, and that's the meeting we'll be discussing that appeal inspection report that we've referred to a few times in this meeting today, and we'll look at what the inspectorate has said, some of the recommendations that they've made, and next steps for the Constabulary on those areas. So that will be our meeting. Thank you very much.